Thank you all again for joining this discussion. For those of you who I have not yet had the chance to meet, my name is Jenny. I'm the Director of Programs and Development here at IDiF, now the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Finance. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we hand it off to these amazing ladies. We're going to kick off the Q&A around the 12:40 mark. But we leave the chat open and we encourage connectivity and networking in this group. We also want to deepen connectivity. So please share your name and what you're working on in the chat. We encourage everyone to lead with curiosity. All perspectives here are equally valid, and we're very appreciative of your continued respect and contributions to this conversation. As a reminder, today's discussion is for educational purposes, and these monthly convenings really remain available at no cost to our participants, thanks to the generous philanthropy of our IDiF champions, including TZP Group, who is here with us today. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to our esteemed moderator, Debbie Ackerman, who's here with us from Amateras Capital. I hope I pronounced that right. So please kick it off, Debbie, and Erin and Heather, thank you so much for being here. What a wonderful way to end the year. So thank you all.
Thanks, Jenny. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this panel today. And I thought I would just kick it off by giving a very, very brief background so that you know sort of a little bit about me, and then turn it over to Heather and Erin and let them do the same. So I've spent the last 30 years investing in the middle market across several different platforms. And I guess I would say becoming increasingly entrepreneurial over time. I've always been in Chicago. I started off at Heller Financial, financing buyout transactions, and then spent about the next 10 years at PPM America, creating and growing their private equity group. And then I left and launched my own fund, Twin Bridge Capital Partners, where I was for about 15 years, until most recently, I've co-founded Amateras AEA, which is an investment platform focused on providing capital solutions. And what I'm really excited about is that we're tapping into our network of incredible female talent. Our mission is to bring the female voice into the private markets in a truly unique way, which I'm passionate about, and it's really exciting. So that's a little bit about me, and I'd love to turn it over to Erin just to give a brief background, her background.
Thank you, Debbie. Excited to be speaking here on this panel today. A little bit of background. I started my investing career at Insight Venture Partners, where I focused on growth stage investing in the technology sector. I then moved after a couple of years there to work full-time at one of Insight's portfolio companies to get operating experience, which I thought was great exposure for me, and also to participate in taking the company public, which was also a very unique and incredibly exciting opportunity. But for those that recall what happened in 2007, I can skip all that part and tell you the IPO never happened, and I got a front row seat at learning that sometimes timing and luck is a big part of the equation. But again, really a great learning experience for me. I did realize after a stint there, I did want to get back to the investing side and also get exposure to different end markets. So I joined AEA Investors, which was a generalist firm, and it was there that I really realized my passion was working in the consumer sector. So in 2010, I came across the opportunity to join North Castle Partners, which is exclusively focused on the consumer segment. Spent over 10 years there. And in 2020, then joined TZP Group as partner to co-head our newly launched growth equity fund and spearhead the consumer investing effort out of that fund. With that, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Thanks, Erin. I'm excited to be a part of this discussion today and really look forward to a great conversation. Unlike Debbie and Erin, I'm on the operations and accounting side of private equity. I started my career at KPMG in their assurance practice, where I focused on higher education, research, and nonprofits. From there, I spent a short time with Constellation Brands and worked on various projects, including the integration of several brand acquisitions. During that time, in 2000, I was approached by a recruiter for an assistant controller position with a private equity firm, which I turned the interview down multiple times because I had no idea what private equity was. Luckily, the recruiter was relentless, and I ended up spending 20 very happy years with Amateras Capital, growing from assistant controller to CFO and CCO. About a year and a half ago, I made a switch, and I have been with TZP as CFO, where I continue to focus on finance and operations. And with that, I will turn it back over to Debbie.
Great. Thanks, Heather and Erin. You can tell we've got some just incredible talent on the panel here today. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think mostly because the idea of mentoring in the workplace is a fairly common one, but the idea of a champion is not something that people typically talk about. And so, I kind of excited to push on what is the difference. And in preparing for today, we collectively, discussed how a champion is like a mentor, except a champion is someone who actively advocates for and promotes your advancement. It's really a voice. The champion is really a voice that speaks for you when you're not in the room. So, Heather, I guess I'd love to get your opinion. Can you think back to one of the first times when you felt like that in your career? And what did that look like?
Yeah, well, I think to start out, to continue on with what you just started, gender disparity is common in the workplace, in finance, as in many other sectors. I think that there's still the perception of the boys' club culture. It can be more challenging for a female in finance to find her footing, and that person that really is going to be her champion. Coinciding with my start at Amateras in 2000, one of the founders became my champion without me really knowing it at first, I think. I was new to private equity, and it took me, some learning and challenges, and he liked to challenge me a lot. But what I truly realized through this interaction was that he was also investing in me and wanting me to succeed. There was a really pivotal moment where we were going over waterfalls in one of our earlier legal documents, and I was discussing with him my understanding of how it all worked, and he didn't think I knew what I was talking about, and he wanted our attorneys to join the call. And as he ticked through the waterfall and challenged my analysis, the attorney kept saying, "Heather's right, Heather's right." And when we finished, he got up and he shook my hand and admitted he was wrong, and told me how proud he was that I had stood my ground with him, even though I was still pretty green, in the job. So it was that moment where it all clicked, that I had this super smart co-founder who was on my side and really wanting me to succeed. And I think over the years, he showed that even after retiring. And it was that time and effort that he spent with me that's really allowed me to shape how I am as a leader, and both professionally and personally. I took that experience and I've tried to really be a champion to my teams over the years.
Well, that's great. I would say, as Heather points out, a champion does not only have to be a female champion. It can be a male champion. I guess, Erin, I'd love your perspective. When you look back on your career, are there some examples that you can think of where you were championed by a man? And what did that do for you and your growth as a female investor? I mean, just by way of context, I would say, we've learned that companies with more gender balanced workforces have outperformed their least balanced peers by as much as 2 percentage points. And that's from a study that was done by BlackRock from 2013 to 2022. I'd love to hear your perspective, Erin.
Sure. You know, when I look back on my career, I think a few of my biggest mentors and champions have actually been men. If I think about my time at Nordcastle, one of the partners there, we had built a very nice relationship. We worked closely together. And he really, more than just a mentor-mentee relationship, went out of his way to invest the time to really teach and coach and mentor. But one step further was to really advocate and be a champion and make sure that I had exposure to different and new and exciting opportunities, which really allowed me to have confidence and to succeed. I think that's an interesting point because there are a lot of men out there who do want women to succeed, right? They do want gender balanced teams, and they want people that will work hard and that want to learn. And I think you need to find those people. And interestingly, there are a lot of senior men right now in the workforce that have daughters that are now working. And they are now hearing these young women's perspectives firsthand. Recently had a conversation with my uncle, who has 3 daughters, and my 3 cousins followed in his footsteps into sales. And they were sort of complaining to him that they feel left out because they are not invited to some of these networking events, or these events just inherently don't really, invite women. If you don't play golf, if you don't like the, hockey, sports, etc., just going to the bar for drinks. And so, he realized that they were right. And he also realized that he and many of his colleagues were contributed to this is totally inadvertently over the years. And so, I think the good part is my uncle is not alone, and there are now a lot of people having their eyes open to this issue and are now focused on creating more inclusive networking opportunities. I think as you think about finding those people, I've always primarily worked at very small organizations, some as small as less than 15 people. And so in looking for a mentor or even that champion, what that forced me to do was sometimes look outside my firm or advocate for myself, right? And so what I took the time to do was invest in that network. I built a network of executives, senior folks in the industry, just not at my firm, who really gave me great advice, which included to really carve out the time to focus on the power of relationships, and also to keep your mind open to new opportunities, constantly be raising your hand, putting yourself out there. It's easy to, keep your head down and not create that time for yourself and just focus on the task in front of you. But you really do owe it to yourself to invest in these relationships and explore new opportunities. And I think on the last point you mentioned, that's a powerful statistic. And I do think there is increasing awareness on the benefits of having a gender balanced, diverse workforce, which again, I think, benefits all.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Erin. I mean, I guess I can relate to having a champion in my career advancement that sort of touches on some of the points that both of you made. My example was with the CEO of the second firm that I joined, and we got off to a really shaky start when I was brand new to the firm, and my boss at the time was golfing and left me to answer the CEO's questions when I had no business doing that and had really no idea what I was doing. So after that initial interaction with him, I had to work very hard to overcome that shaky start. But once I did, he really became a strong advocate for me and has helped me throughout my career. So I guess one thing I would point out, using your examples and maybe my example as well, and things that came up when we were preparing for this panel, we all sort of noted that we didn't realize our champions were in fact our champions right away. And in fact, they may not have been the people that we were, expecting would be our champions. And so I mention this because I think it's important to think outside the box when really trying to foster these types of relationships, whether it's you being the one championed or whether it's you supporting someone else. So continuing on the theme of female advancements, there was a report, the most recent McKinsey report that came out of women in the workplace, said the biggest barrier to women's advancement isn't the glass ceiling, which has been around for a long time, but it's rather the broken rung. And that is the greatest obstacle women face on the path to senior leadership. All women lose ground at the first step to manager, but the broken rung really holds back Black women and Latinos the most. So I guess given your perspective, Heather, how do you think that the landscape has changed for women over the last 10 years? What have you seen?
Such a good question. And I don't want to speak for Black or Latino women. What I can say from my perspective, unfortunately, is that the rules are still different for women and men. And it takes thick skin to navigate it all. As I previously mentioned, I'm not on the deal side, but I've been in the industry for long enough and observed a lot of activity. And private equity is notorious for losing good, strong women as they come up the ranks. I think the industry is making strides to decrease the loss of women, but it's difficult for many women to find the work-life balance, especially when a family is in play. And I know all of us have talked about this, and Erin, especially, I think, given being on the deal side and probably being on the road more than me, has more perspective on this as well.
Erin, what are your thoughts?
I think that's right. This, given the demands of what we do, there's long hours, there's lots of travel, sometimes it's last minute. There is a lot of time away. I think, in addition to having a mentor or a champion at the office, it's incredibly important to have a champion at home, especially if there are children that are part of the equation. My husband has always been very supportive, which has been incredibly helpful, if not necessary. And it's also helpful to have an understanding employer. There are times where, I may need to come in late or leave early to try and make a school concert or a parent-teacher meeting. And having a team that understands that is key. Right now with cell phones and, VPNs, we really can all work anywhere. Right. And so I think, and obviously some of that trust comes with having been someplace for a long time where people realize you're still getting your work done. Right. And I also think COVID has debunked the myth that people cannot be productive working from home. I think we have all proven that some level of flexibility can not only be productive, but also really helpful in building employee morale and loyalty and retention. When kids are part of the equation, I have 3. They are now 9, almost 8, and 5. I think kids have to be understanding as well, which certainly can be tough, especially when they are young. But personally, I think it's healthy for them to see both parents working, doing something that they enjoy and are passionate about. I don't want to pretend, though, that it is always easy or that I have not had moments of self-doubt, especially when someone, one of my children is telling me that I'm, why am I not the class mom, or why am I not at every class party? But in the end, I think there's certainly many more benefits, and I, along with my family, are committed to trying to make it all work. I also think it's very important to note that I don't think these types of questions regarding work-life balance should be designated solely for women. I know many men and fathers that, they do like to be present in things with their kids or outside the home. And, many got to experience this during COVID in a different way. And many, too, are struggling to go back to in the office and now going back to missing these events. And so, to that end, I think that both men and women's desire to have a more flexible working environment will ultimately be better for all, and then ultimately helpful in keeping young women in the workforce.
Great.
Yeah, I guess I would say all 3 of us have girls. And so, we like to think, and I believe that we are actually leading by example here. So I think that's wonderful. And I would also say that in my experience, if I ever did anything that was deemed more flexible, it was docked against me. And that was not always a consistent approach with the men in my group. I think that one of the factors that comes into play when you talk about finance in general is it's a constant battle between people trying to prove their value add. And if you don't have someone who sees your value add, once you get past a certain point, it's really hard to get promoted. How do you develop a champion, or how do you find someone to recognize your value added and create a personal relationship? How do you develop a relationship like that that's natural? Heather, do you have any advice on that?
I do. Exposure at the senior level, it really needs to be at that level, because those are the people that have the resources and are able to provide you with the path to success. I will again go back to my prior fund because my tenure at TZP has been short thus far. And I think about the current controller at Swander Pace. I remember when she first started, she was brand new to private equity. So obviously I could take a step back and remember what that was like. She joined as a fund accountant, and I remember when the controller and I met her, and we just saw so much potential, and I think we both became her champions. And we would run through a brick wall for her. She knew I had her back. And it went both ways. She had my back as well. And I think that's the great part of being a champion too. It's a mutual, it goes both ways with helping one another. And it's so rewarding.
I think that's a great point. Of course, there's not one silver bullet. And again, I think it probably is very different if you work at large organizations, where I have friends at large banks where they actually have formal mentor programs or diversity programs, right? And versus what might be very, so that they create an environment for that, versus if you work at small or medium-sized organizations, it can be harder. But I think, number one, it's hard work. It is hard work to try and really build and foster those relationships. And I think, Heather, you really hit on something that resonated. It's two ways, right? And it really does build on itself. And so when I think back to one of the partners at North Castle I mentioned earlier, I can almost remember where it started. Actually, it started when he told me I did something wrong. And I was, like floored. And he told me that if I ever did it like that again, right. It was a really harsh conversation. And it was at that point that I took that feedback, made it constructive and built on that from there on out. And I worked tremendously hard for him, always took the extra step, went the extra mile. And then he, I think, recognized that and then took the time again to really, out of his day, above and beyond what he was doing, to really, again, teach me, mentor me, things that were even above my level and where I should have had access or exposure, which was just incredibly important for me, such that when he asked me to do something, no matter what time of day, night, or weekend, I would have done it. I would have run through a wall for him. And then, we had that trust and that rapport, and candidly, that gratitude that I think comes with again, that two-way relationship. And so I think there is definitely effort involved, but like most things, where there's a reward, it's worth the effort. And so I think, try to find people within the organization. It helps when there are common interests and things that you can talk about and build the personal side of that relationship. But again, I think even on the professional side, your willingness to go the extra mile for someone and prove that you want to be coached. You are there to learn, right? You're not a taskmaster, master of doing what they ask, and then, you're done for the day. People see that and people appreciate that, particularly at the senior levels, and they want to invest in you and want you to succeed. And that, the relationship can sort of morph into a mentor, and over time, it hopefully will become a champion for you inside the organization.
Yeah. I think you both mentioned or have alluded to the fact that it's hard. It's not easy to do, right? So for those who are rising up the ranks, speaking honestly, can you talk about the pressures of your roles and what advice would you give to those who are considering a career in private equity or in financial services in general?
So I'll go first. I will unequivocally say I love private equity. I love what I do. And I know that that can sound a little hokey, but I truly feel blessed that I fell into this, 20 plus years ago. What I will say is the hours can be long. So you need to find the balance that works for you. And it's going to be different for everyone, right? There's always something new on the horizon, whether it be on the deal side, regulations, just a lot of different things. So you need to be up to the challenge and view them as opportunities to grow. And touching upon one of the things that Erin just said is, that learning, but also when you are working with your champion or mentor, take the ownership of your work. If you do make mistakes, learn from it, figure out how to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that, kind of gets you to the next level and also builds on that role or relationship that you have with your champion. I think the biggest thing is to be resilient and keep a positive attitude. Private equity is an industry of incredibly intelligent people, and I feel very lucky to work with them.
That's great. Erin, how about you? Any advice?
Sure. I think as we both have touched on throughout this conversation, private equity does require a lot of time, a lot of hours in the office, a lot of hours traveling. And the reality is that we spend more waking hours with our colleagues than we do with friends and family, which, is obvious, but when you say it out loud, it really is a bit jarring. And so I'd say, choose your firms, choose choose the people that you work with wisely. I think life is too short to work with anything but great people. And that's a saying that, definitely fills the halls in and around TZP quite often. We all here subscribe to that, which goes a long way. It's very important, I think, to be at a culture that aligns with your values and really supports you not only as an individual, but also family responsibilities, just sort of tying all the themes here together. For me, it was also about finding a category and a segment that I was passionate about. I was fortunate to realize fairly early on that my passion, I really loved working with companies at their growth stage, and also the consumer sector. And so I have basically spent the last 15 years doing just that. And again, sounds a little cliche, but when you do find a job that you love and it feels rewarding and challenging, we're constantly learning something new. It's a different, it's a fast pace, and working with people that you really respect and enjoy, it doesn't really feel like work. And so I think that is the advice I would give to anybody inside private equity or out, candidly.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I guess after you've sort of risen in the ranks and as you do become more senior, like the two of you are now, you're both partner and C-suite level. How do you navigate that landscape and the internal dynamics there? And specifically, do you ever feel lonely? And if so, sort of how do you manage that? Heather, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, I think it's good that the three of us are here because we come with different perspectives. But from my perspective, yes, it can be lonely. It can feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders when you are sitting in, the CFO seat and signing off on, how we're, approaching a topic. But I will say the best defense for that is networking and growing your support system internally at your fund and also externally. That's one of the things that I started to focus on early on in my private equity career, growing those relationships, having a group of other controllers, CFOs who I can reach out to and just run things by them. It's a two-way street. They know they can pick up the phone and call me. And then, looking for moments where you can champion for someone and grow that connection. That's the other way that it just makes it all very rewarding. I love helping women succeed, and I think that will continue to be top priority for me as I continue on in my career.
That's great advice. I love it. Erin, did you have any thoughts on this?
I think some of the best advice I ever received was to listen, learn, and be confident. Thinking about lonely, I remember one of the first boardrooms I ever sat at was inside the Insight office, and there were probably 24 seats, and they were all much older men, and here I was, probably 23-year-old woman, and I don't think I've ever felt so self-conscious in all my life. I remember that moment vividly, and so I think it certainly can be difficult to be confident when you are young or one of the only women in the room, or you feel like an outlier. And listen, it can always be easy to find something to psych yourself out and question your confidence. But remember, if you have, worked hard, you deserve, to be where you are. And so be confident. With respect to feeling lonely now, I'd say sometimes I feel lonely, sometimes as a working mom, whereas many of my kids, probably more in my personal life, as I think about social dynamics, that my job is probably a lot more demanding than many of the other women in my community. And so sometimes that can be challenging, or my kids are left out of certain activities, because those women don't work, and they, develop play dates and relationships and activities that my kids don't go to. And so that sometimes, can feel lonely. At the office, I'd say stressed is probably, the word I would use more accurate. But, just given the responsibility that we have, to be fiduciaries of this type of capital. But again, I think, Heather, as you said, leverage your network, leverage your colleagues, your partners, confidants, to, constantly be bouncing ideas, ask for help, right? I read a great article recently. It was actually a CEO of a company that, ultimately had to file for bankruptcy. And he wrote this long essay, which I thought was incredibly powerful, sort of sharing the mistakes he made along the way to ultimately, use it as lessons for others. And one of them high on the list was raise your hand, ask for help. One of the things he said was he had raised money from investors, and when things were growing really well, he picked up the phone all the time and was really excited to share the good news. But when things started to get tough, he, in hindsight, realized he had really clammed up and tried to solve all of these problems on his own. And, he did say if he were to do it over, it was, raise your hand, ask questions, ask for help, and again, lean on this network of relationships that hopefully you have really invested in along the way. Because I think, that can be incredibly helpful, make you feel more confident, and make you feel less stressed and less lonely.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think I heard some great ideas there. I think in particular, the whole idea of networking is a positive one, and being confident is sometimes a challenge for women in particular. With your example, Erin, when you're the only person who looks like you in the room. And I think the last thing that really resonates with me is something Heather said, and that is looking for other opportunity, or looking for opportunities to champion other people, to be there for them now that you are a senior and have been so successful in your careers. I guess we've kind of come to the end now of what we prepared for the panel discussion, but any last comments or thoughts before we move to Q&A section?
I have one more thing just based on something Erin just said, that I think was some really good advice in the last few years. I worked with an executive coach about a year and a half ago, and we talked through a lot of different topics. And one of the things that I felt that I needed to work on was talking more in the boardroom setting, in the meeting setting. And one of the things that she said to me was, it's okay to be the quiet person in the room, because when the quiet person actually speaks, it is generally more thoughtful and people listen. And so that resonated with me so much. And so I just thought that was great advice that I would share, especially for the younger women coming up, that you don't have to be the loudest voice in the room to be successful.
That's great, Heather. Thanks. Erin, did you have any last thoughts?
No, I think happy to turn it over to Q&A.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. Well, that was fascinating. Debbie, Erin, and Heather, thank you so much for taking the time. We have an intimate room today, so I feel like it's a great opportunity. We usually encourage people to take off their camera if they're in a place that they're able. Please raise your hand, and would love to hear any similar stories or lessons learned, and any potential ideas that people are seeing, anything that might have worked at your own organization, or things that are not working. So please share those with us, and just raise your hand, and we'll call on you in the order that we receive. You can also pop your question in the chat as well. See everyone thinking.
Yeah,
Thinking.
got a quick question. Hi. Just as you think about your experiences of champions, can you talk a little about potentially peers who were champions?
That's a really good question. Let me just take a stab for a moment here. I think one of the things that the way we were looking at the champion idea was, it was somebody that really had to be senior and in a position of power and able to influence your outcome. And so we didn't really talk about it in the context of peers per se, just because that's the way we defined it. I think it's really important, to your point, to have people that you work with on a side-by-side basis to support you and also have your back. They just may not be in the same sort of in the same sort of hierarchy to be able to influence quite as much as somebody who we're defining as more senior from a champion role.
Sure. Think of allyship in particular. That's kind of what I was thinking, is how do you both encourage that, either in your employee groups or in your own teams, or how have you benefited from that, over your career?
I think that comes from listening and really hearing people, and taking the time to understand where someone is coming from. We all have our own agendas, obviously, but I think that when you pause and try to understand whether it be somebody's needs or where they want to, go in their career, I think that's the opportunity to really have that, no matter what level you're at. And it's also about respect, right? It's about treating everyone in your organization, no matter what level they are, with the same, you know, the same way that you would expect someone to treat you.
Yep, I agree. And I think a lot of that comes from the top, the organization and the firm's culture. You know, I think here the partner group is incredibly supportive. And I think, you know, respectful of each other, and also very generous with their own time, their networks, their knowledge, which I think, you know, there's a culture here that we all win together, right? And so I think, you know, because this industry can have a lot of type A personalities, a lot of people wanting to get to the top. And if the culture and the tone isn't set that we all win together, you know, I think it can be a very difficult, potentially even toxic environment. And so, you know, I do think that, you know, trust, respect and collaboration is incredibly important. And thankfully, you know, we do have that here, which I'm incredibly grateful for. You know, I mentioned, you know, not feeling lonely, right? I've never knocked on somebody's door with a question or an issue or just an idea that I'd like to bounce off of. And I know I've seen everybody's calendar, you know, in Outlook, right? Busy all day. And I've never once been turned away, you know, and always carving out the time. And, you know, because we all win together, right? And so I think that is just something that, again, you know, I think particularly as people, as women evolve in their careers, that culture and the people you work with just becomes so incredibly important. You know, I had an interview years ago where this gentleman who was the head of the firm, he was, I don't know if rude was the right word, but there was just a level of tension on this call that I thought that was 45 minutes. I can't imagine working, you know, what it must be like to work there. And I, you know, subsequently came to know people that work there, and, you know, they're successful by the numbers would say, but I think you know, I don't know if necessarily people would be, you know, speaking the way that, you know, Debbie and Heather and I are about our firms. And so there just becomes you know, what matters to you. And so I would just say, certainly let that, you know, sort of factor into your equation, because it is so meaningful for your not only professional development and your professional health, but your mental health, right? Which is all so closely related.
Heather, and do you mind introducing yourself as well? My apologies for everyone. Thank you.
Sure. My name's Heather Gould, and this is my first time joining. Thank you to David Madden for introducing me. David and I were colleagues several years ago, and he has been actually a wonderful advocate over the last several weeks. So thank you, David. So my question, you know, I will say, and David will know exactly who I'm talking about, I was extremely fortunate early in my career, or middle of my career, to have an incredible sponsor. Yes, would walk through walls for this person. Yes, stayed curious. Yes, I worked my ass off for this person, but also he advocated for me in every room possible, right? And that happened, I think, partially because I showed up as curious and hardworking and willing to learn. But one of the things I think a lot about is, how do you walk that line with younger women to help them understand what it takes to find a sponsor without showing up very awkwardly, for lack of a better word, and saying, hey, I want a sponsor, I'm looking for a sponsor? Because I see that sometimes where it's this sort of very transactional, will you sponsor me, will you mentor me? And it's not based on how they show up or how they perform. It's based on, I need you to do this for me. And I'd be curious to know if any of you have ever been in that situation where you have to kind of coach someone through the dynamic.
As this, So I have not. I can picture though the scenario that you're talking about, and that's where it is, that balance, it's very difficult to make it organic, right? And natural. And so, in my situation, it was a partner I was already working with very closely. And so we had lots of interactions that were just part of our everyday job. And it happened over time, where again, sort of, I'm going to outwork everybody else. I'm going to listen. I see you willing, I'm going to take it, right? Versus some people that might say, 6, 7 o'clock, I've got to go. And so I think that was natural. And I do think when it's more transactional, the authenticity has to be on both sides. And so while it's certainly, I love the eagerness and the leaning in to wanting that, but I think if it's really going to work and be as productive as we would all like it to be, right? Because at the end of the day, we want advocates and champions when we're not in the room. And the reality is, I don't think someone's going to do that if it was just sort of asked and you haven't sort of proven it and worked for it. And so, I think it's okay to ask, but then I think you've got to show up and do the work all of the time, right?
Yeah, totally agree.
I would just add to that. I think it's such a great question. As I look back and think of even the 3 of our examples, a lot of it was, we weren't the ones that were asking on the front end. It was sort of like the other people found us. And like in my example, I started off on a really, really rough foot. And so to Erin's point, I went the extra mile, times 10 to overcome that. And so I think at that point it became natural because the CEO then saw that, and so was just became an advocate for me. I think that in today's world it's even harder because I don't know how it's happened, but people are busier than they used to be. And a lot of this just takes time. And the second piece of it is that you really need to develop a relationship. And some of that's harder to do when you're remote or when you're Zooming. And so there's an added challenge for those reasons, trying to develop these relationships today. So I guess that's why I would encourage, people that are in a position to champion others to actively go out and really, really look for people that they can champion. And if you want or need a champion, take a lesson in sort of the idea of hard work and proving yourself above and beyond what you sort of need to do, I think will go a long way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I agree. And I think could be awkward. And when I look back to my example, when I got to Swander, the controller went on a leave of absence my second week, and I had to figure this out. And I was like, I can do this. I worked hours, worked harder than I ever had. And I think that what JB saw in that was, she might not know the answer, but she's going to figure it out. And I think that that's all I want from anybody that I'm working with is that we're all working together and for the common goal, but that we're all putting in different effort because we're all doing different things, but the same amount of, I don't know if it's enthusiasm, but just the being passionate about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Mandy?
Hi, everyone. Mandy Bynum Consulting. I advise for venture capital fund managers, have run nonprofits, including Black VC, and I'm attending as an advocate and a supporter of IDiF. My question is about somewhat building off of Heather's question. I'll start just kind of responding to that. These younger folks who are coming up and who are straight up asking us to be their mentors because, yeah, they didn't have the same environment that we had to actually build those relationships. I've been asked many times, and it's really inspiring. There's both this strange entitlement, which I love, and a willingness to work and get just jump forward. And I've learned a lot. And in those situations, like I am learning as much from them as they are from me. So I would love to encourage anyone who's straight up asked to mentor to really engage in those conversations, because that person is being has a lot of gumption. So therefore, my question is, we're all of us, regardless of our gender, are so conditioned by the patriarchy, so conditioned to be threatened by one another, so conditioned to so many different things, including like how we respond to younger people. It's part of our conditioning. And I'm sure at this point in our careers, I have been lucky enough to be in C-suite with another Black woman, and we had differing opinions. However, it was very important for us to be co-conspirators. That has not always been the situation for me. I have definitely been in rooms where there was another woman who saw me as a threat. And so I'm curious to know from you all, like, what has your experience been, and in what ways have you checked yourself or been like, oh my gosh, is that me doing that? Like, that's not what I would expect from someone else. So I'm curious to know, like, where that's come up for you in an ideally vulnerageous space here.
I can maybe jump in there. I get that because for the first, bunch of years in my career, I had always worked basically with and for men and had wanted to work for women. And then I got that, and it was not necessarily what I thought. And it turns out that, I had a kid, then I had a second kid, and I would have rather approached any one of the male partners in that organization to say, I have to leave early. It was, 5:45, and to go home and do a pickup, or there was an emergency. It was, and I was bordering on terrified of approaching her with that, which was really a shame. Again, and just to be clear, I think a shame to make someone feel that way in any gender, but the fact that I had really this vision in my head and I had really long wanted to work for a woman, it was incredibly, disappointing. And, I think that in some ways, again, always looking for the learning is, I do think it has very consciously, sort of shaped how I interact with people on my team, whether it's, senior peers, junior, because I think I did not like feeling that way. And so it was something that, and this was somebody I would have ran through a wall for her as well. And so it was just so disappointing that there was that issue. And I do think sometimes, I think we all see it, we all read about it, the classifications of women, where some are really truly, we want to lift each other up. And then there are some that would look back and say, she told me she went to the office the day that she had her baby. Other people who worked there were like, she did not, but I think she really remembered it that way. Right. And so it just created this, unnecessary stress. And some of it wasn't even true. And to sort of have this, well, I did this. And so, you have to live through it as well, versus just wanting, better environments and more constructive environments for those that come after us. And so I think it has definitely, it was eye-opening for me. And if nothing else, I hope it has made me be a better manager and colleague.
Yeah, I will echo. When I was first at KPMG, I had a female manager, and I was excited because there, even in public accounting at that point, weren't a lot of females. And I think that she had managers who just made her grind and made her pay for everything coming up. And she was going to do the same for everyone under her. And I remember that she told me, I think I was a year and a half into my public accounting career, that I didn't have what it took to be in public accounting because, whatever the scenario was. And I looked at her and I thought, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I made sure the day that I was promoted a year early to manager that she got the notice. But I took that learning experience and I decided from that day forward, I don't care if I'm dealing with the janitor in the building or the CEO in the, at the company. I'm going to treat somebody the way that I expect to be treated. I do think it's a fine line when you're a female executive. And I have had to check myself a couple of times when it comes to, I expect a lot out of my team and I give a lot. And sometimes I think you can get going so quickly that you have to hit pause and think about the way that you're going to approach something in order to get it done, because we need to get to the end result, but how we get there, if you can look at it from a different view, everybody can get there and be happy and successful together.
Yeah, I mean, just my 2 cents here. I think that some of the things we're talking about here are sort of personality traits that apply to men and to women equally. And I think this industry that we're in financial services, has a disproportionate number of people who have made it to the top, and it might be because they've got some of these personality traits. And so I've certainly dealt with people like this that are male and that are female, and it's all how you respond to the relationship. I've done something as simplistic as, almost since I started my career, maintaining a sort of do and don't list from a managerial perspective. And a lot of the things on the list, when you look at them, seem really simplistic. But many times where I feel slighted or where I feel I've been treated unfairly in my career, it's because managers or my boss has been violating those really simplistic things. And so, I think it's really just doing what you can to learn from, what you've experienced throughout your career and improve. Not sure that answered your question, but we certainly all have had similar sort of situations. I guess the very last thing I would say is this goes back to a comment that Heather made early on when we were speaking, and that is you really got to have some thick skin, which is hard sometimes.
We just have a couple minutes left. Thank you. And thank you, Mandy, for asking such a great question. I have one, we think we have time for just one more. Sam, are you able to come off camera? I'm happy to read this. The last question that you popped in the chat. So Sam asked, how do you identify who you will want to be your champion and who will be successful at championing? Who is going to be?
I'll say it. Sorry.
Okay.
Hi. Very quickly, how do you identify who you champion, like who you choose to champion? What kind of qualifiers do you use to determine who you will be best at championing, both on, let's say, in a team environment within a company you're working for, and or beyond your company in your investments, as in a pay it forward kind of concept?
Great question.
I think it's somebody who shows initiative, who is asking questions, who is showing that they have curiosity about learning, and is willing to also be somewhat of a self-starter, that is not just sitting there, waiting for you to give him or her something to do. And I think there are a lot of people, it's somewhat of a personality trait when it comes right down to it, because you can't teach curiosity, you can't teach that drive. Somebody has to really want want to succeed and want to learn.
Yeah. Okay, well, we are officially at the 1 o'clock mark, and I promised these very busy ladies that I would let them get back to their day jobs. So this was a wonderful way to bring the curated convenings back. We will be back on a more regular cadence. So for those interested, please be sure to sign up for our newsletter. You can check us out at www.idif.org. And just a massive thanks to Debbie, Erin, and Heather and TZP Group at large for sponsoring this convening and for these three wonderful women sharing their time. Please continue the connectivity. This entire industry is all about network, as we know. So find your champion, potentially even someone within the IDiF community. And thank you again, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day and stay warm.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.